State television in front of cameras, with the full weight of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps standing behind the words. Iranian commanders have looked directly into the lens and promised that if the United States Navy sails the USS Abraham Lincoln into striking distance of their coastline, they will send her to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. They have released propaganda videos showing carrier strike groups exploding in flames. They have tested anti-ship ballistic missiles specifically designed, they claim, to punch through American carrier defenses. They have named the USS Abraham Lincoln by name. And every single time, the Abraham Lincoln is still there, still sailing, still launching aircraft, still projecting 100,000 tons of American power across the most contested waterways on the planet. And the question that nobody in the mainstream media ever stops to actually answer, the question that Iran's own military commanders privately wrestle with at night, is not whether Iran wants to sink the Abraham Lincoln. The question is whether Iran can. The answer is one of the most strategically important and least honestly discussed topics in modern geopolitics. Because the gap between Iran's rhetoric and Iran's actual capability against a Nimitz-class nuclear supercarrier is not a small gap. It is not a manageable gap that a few more missile tests will close. It is a chasm. An engineering, tactical, electronic, and strategic chasm so vast that understanding it completely reframes every headline you have ever read about US-Iran tensions in the Persian Gulf. Here is what Iran actually has: ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, fast attack boats, mines, submarines, drone swarms, an asymmetric warfare doctrine built around the idea of turning the narrow geography of the Persian Gulf into a kill box where America's technological advantages are neutralized by sheer volume and chaos. Iranian military planners have studied American carrier operations for decades. They have war-gamed carrier strike group engagements in exercises that reportedly alarmed some of their own commanders with how aggressively the scenarios were constructed. They genuinely believe, or at least publicly project the belief, that they have a viable path to striking a carrier. What they have never had to actually test those theories against is the real thing. Because the USS Abraham Lincoln is not a ship. She is a weapons system wrapped inside a defensive ecosystem so layered, so redundant, so technologically overwhelming that attacking her successfully is not a military operation. It is closer to a miracle. And miracles, as history has repeatedly demonstrated, are not a reliable foundation for naval strategy. This is the story of why Iran cannot sink the USS Abraham Lincoln. And by the time this video is over, you will understand why every Iranian missile launch, every fast boat swarm exercise, and every propaganda video showing carriers on fire is, at its core, theater. Terrifying theater. Expensive theater. But theater nonetheless. To understand why sinking the Abraham Lincoln is essentially impossible for Iran in its current military configuration, you have to understand what a carrier strike group actually is. Because most people, including most journalists, think of an aircraft carrier as a single ship. It is not. The USS Abraham Lincoln never sails alone. She moves as the centerpiece of a carrier strike group, a precisely engineered defensive formation that surrounds her with multiple layers of protection before a single Iranian missile ever gets close enough to matter. In a standard deployment configuration, Lincoln is accompanied by a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, 2 to 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, at least one fast attack submarine operating silently beneath the surface, and a logistics vessel maintaining the group's operational endurance. Each of these ships is itself a sophisticated weapons platform. Together, they form a defensive bubble that extends hundreds of miles in every direction from Lincoln's hull. The outermost layer of this bubble is electronic. The carrier strike group's sensor network, combining the SPY-1 radar arrays on the Ticonderoga cruiser and Arleigh Burke destroyers, with airborne early warning aircraft operating continuously from Lincoln's flight deck, can detect incoming threats at ranges that give the group time to respond, track, and engage long before any weapon reaches the inner defensive perimeter. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. Lincoln's airborne radar platform can see incoming threats at ranges exceeding 300 miles. Every missile Iran launches, the moment it leaves its launcher, is being tracked. The second layer is missiles. The Aegis Combat System, the integrated weapons and sensor platform that equips both the Ticonderoga and the Arleigh Burkes, is arguably the most capable naval air defense system ever deployed at sea. It can simultaneously track hundreds of targets and engage dozens of them at the same time. The SM-2 and SM-6 standard missiles it fires have ranges and engagement envelopes that cover altitudes from wavetop to near space. Iran's anti-ship ballistic missiles, the weapons Iranian commanders most frequently cite as their carrier killer capability, must fly a ballistic arc that brings them back down through exactly the engagement envelope that Aegis was specifically designed and upgraded to defeat. The SM-3 interceptor variant, deployed on some strike group vessels, was literally engineered to kill ballistic missiles in their terminal descent phase. It has done so in live tests repeatedly. The third layer is close-in defense. If something, anything, somehow penetrates the outer and middle layers, the Abraham Lincoln herself carries the RIM-116 rolling airframe missile system and the Phalanx close-in weapon system, a radar-guided 20mm Gatling cannon that fires 4,500 rounds per minute and can autonomously engage and destroy incoming missiles at close range without human input. The Phalanx system is so automated, so fast, and so accurate that naval engineers call it the last line of defense. Not because it is the only option, but because by the time a threat reaches its engagement range, every other layer of the strike group's defense has already had multiple opportunities to destroy it. Now consider Iran's primary offensive options against this system. Iran's Khalijfars and Hormuz series missiles are designed to target moving ships. Hitting a moving carrier from a ballistic trajectory requires terminal guidance systems accurate enough to track and correct against a ship moving at 30+ knots across open water. Iran has tested these systems. Independent analysis of those tests suggests the guidance accuracy required to actually hit a maneuvering carrier, not a stationary target, a maneuvering carrier being actively defended, remains well beyond demonstrated Iranian capability, and that assumes the missile survives the Aegis engagement envelope, which it almost certainly does not. Cruise missiles, Iran's Nor, Qadr, and Sumar variants, fly lower and faster and present a different threat profile. But cruise missiles require mid-course guidance updates for long-range engagements, and the carrier strike group's electronic warfare systems are specifically designed to blind, jam, and spoof exactly this guidance architecture. Iranian cruise missiles operating in a heavily jammed electromagnetic environment against a fully alerted strike group become expensive pieces of debris. Fast attack boat swarms, the IRGC Navy's signature asymmetric tactic, are genuinely dangerous in narrow confined waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. Against a carrier strike group in open water with destroyers, helicopters, and fixed-wing aircraft actively hunting them, they are catastrophically vulnerable. The destroyers alone carry weapon systems that can engage and destroy dozens of small surface contacts simultaneously. The carrier's own aircraft would be airborne within minutes of a swarm contact report. Iranian fast boats in open water against a fully alert carrier strike group would not survive long enough to get within weapons range. Here is where this story gets genuinely complicated. Because saying Iran cannot sink the Abraham Lincoln is not the same as saying Iran cannot hurt the United States, and it is absolutely not the same as saying Iran's military threat is not real, not dangerous, or not worth taking seriously. Iran's actual strategic doctrine is not built around sinking carriers. That is the public rhetoric, designed for domestic consumption, for regional deterrence signaling, for the propaganda value of making Iranian citizens feel protected and Iranian enemies feel threatened. Iran's real military planners are not delusional. They know what the Aegis system can do. They have read the same open-source technical analyses that everyone else has read. They understand that a direct conventional assault on a carrier strike group ends with Iranian missiles in the ocean, and Iranian launchers destroyed by retaliatory airstrikes within hours. What Iran's doctrine is actually built around is cost imposition and threshold manipulation. The strategy is not to sink Lincoln. The strategy is to make operating Lincoln in the Persian Gulf so expensive, so logistically demanding, so politically complicated, and so operationally exhausting that the United States eventually decides the cost isn't worth the benefit. Mine the Strait of Hormuz and force the Navy to dedicate minesweeper assets America currently has a critical shortage of, to clearing lanes, launch enough drone and missile harassment attacks against regional U.S. bases to keep American commanders reactive and defensive rather than offensive and proactive.
But why?